e4, e5, white knight h3, d5, knight back g1, knight f6, d3, pawn capture pawn, e4, pawn capture, e4, queen capture queen, da, queen capture queen, king capture queen, check, f3, backup, knight c3, bishop b4, knight b5, knight a6, knight h3, black king castle, a3, c6, pawn capture bishop b4, pawn capture knight b5, g5, check, rook, bishop protect, h6, knight h3, knight c7, rook capture pawn a7, rook b8, pawn g3, rook d8, knight, pawn g4, rook d4, pawn capture bishop h5, knight capture pawn h5, e c3, rook b6, pawn f4, knight f4, knight capture knight f4, pawn capture knight f4, pawn e5, rook d5, pawn c4, pawn capture pawn e4, bishop capture pawn e4, rook capture e5, rook a5, rook e4, rook f5, rook capture bishop e4, rook f1, rook d8, rook capture pawn f4, rook capture rook f4, white, rook capture black f4, knight e6, rook e4, rook g5, rook e7, knight f3, rook c7, rook capture bishop, give a check, d2, queen c1, rook capture h2, rook capture b7, knight d8, d4, rook give a check black, queen h7, rook d8, Knight b3 check. Queen ba. Rook give a check. h1. King to a2. Knight c1. King c1. Knight b3. King c2. Knight a1 check. King c3. Rook h3 check. King c4. Rook b3. Pawn b5. Rook capture pawn b2. King c5. Rook c2. King b6. Knight b3. King a6. Rook c5. Pawn b6. Rook give a check. a5. King b7. Knight check. c5. King e6. Knight e6. Rook d6. Rook a6. King b5. Rook a8. Pawn b7. Rook b8. King b6. Knight d8. Rook capture knight d8. Rook capture rook d8. King c2 c7. Rook f8. King c6. Pawn g5. King c7. Pawn g8 g4. Queen b8. Rook capture queen b8. King capture rook b8. g3. c7. f5. d7. f4. e6. g2. f5. f3. f4. f2. f3. King give a check. King g3 check. Queen h4 check. Queen h1. King g3. Queen f3 checkmated. Black is win.